Hi everyone, I'm Liz and welcome back to Elizabeth Ann Can Stitch. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I put together this project bag using an English paper pieced hexagon panel. So this video is more of a process video than a standard kind of tutorial with a pattern. You can really make this bag any size you want. It all kind of depends on the EPP panel that you make and the size you want the bag to turn out. So I'm going to walk you through all of my process and all of the steps that you need to create this bag. And of course, I'll tell you exactly how I got the size that I made, which is not really, it's a smaller project bag, but this is perfect for like a Christmas ornament kit or project that you're working on. It's probably a little bit tight for a full-size pattern, but you can definitely make this bigger. You would just need to start with more 2.5-inch squares than I did. I will include links to the supplies that I used down in the description box below, and please let me know in the comments if there's anything else that you have questions on. Hi guys, welcome to my craft table. Before we get to this pile of fun, I want to talk a little bit about my English paper piecing and the supplies that I use to create my English paper pieced or EPP panel. So first thing is I used a mini charm pack, so 2.5-inch squares. This layout that I did actually requires 45 hexagons, and so most mini charm packs come with 42. So I added in 3 pieces of fabric, extra pieces of fabric that kind of went with the collection to get to my 45 hexagons. So if you're using a mini charm pack, just know that you'll need 3 extra 2.5-inch squares to achieve this exact same layout that I did, which is a 5x9 kind of offsetting hexagon layout. So I used 1-inch paper hexagons to form my hexies, and you can get these all kinds of places. I'll link to the ones that I got off Amazon below if you're interested. So I used the paper templates. They're like kind of like cardstock, and then I did the glue-based method. So I used this Soline glue stick, and it's just a little twist up glue stick, and I followed the Tulip Pink method for glue basting, and I will link the video in the description box below. So once I had all of my hexagons made and got a layout going, I hand stitched my hexies together into these rows. Again, I followed Tulip Pink's instructions for how to sew hexies together, and I used a number 9 milliner's needle with just plain Aurifil 50 weight to sew everything together. So first step to creating this bag is to create your EPP panel. Okay, so now that we have our panel ready to go, I'm going to pick some accent fabric. And I am following my Halloween EPP bag that I made a few months ago. And so I'm just going to leave this off to the side as kind of a reference of how I put together this one, because I'm going to create this one the same way. And so basically I need an accent fabric for around the zipper. I need a backing fabric and a binding. So let's see, I brought a stack of some Ruby Star fabrics and then a couple of other random ones, to see what I wanted to use. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with this green for the zipper. And I'm trying to decide if I want to do the red on the back of the bag, or actually if I have enough of this green, I think I might just do, yeah, and that'll make it just like this one. So yeah, I'm going to use this for my zipper surround and then for the back of the bag. And then for binding, I already know this green's not going to work. I think it's going to be this pink and red. I wish I had a good red bias like this, but I don't have this size red bias stripe in my stash. I could cut this on the bias. Let's see. So I could do The red bias binding. Yeah, I think the pink is cute. No, you know what? I'm gonna do the red. I'm gonna cut it on the bias. So, okay. Okay, so the first step to constructing the bag is to turn this hexagon piece into a quilted panel for the front of the bag. Actually, this reminds me, I forgot to pull fabric for the lining of the bag, because basically what we're going to do is we're going to quilt together the front of the bag with the lining. And so I need to pick a lining and get a piece cut so we can get this quilted. And I'm just eyeballing because basically I'm just going to be making a little quilt sandwich, and it's fine for there to be extra around the edges because I will trim that off later. So I am just going to give myself a little bit of margin and trim that. Okay, so let me take this over to the ironing board and flatten these, and I'll be right back. Okay, got everything pressed nice and flat. So I'm going to build up my little quilt sandwich, and I'm going to use some basting spray, just a temporary basting spray. This is Spray and Bond. Just going to smooth my batting down. Yep, make sure this is right side up here. And again, just smoothing everything out so that when I quilt, nothing gets all bunchy. Okay, so from here, we're going to take this to the sewing machine and quilt it. I am not going to mark any lines or anything. All I'm going to do is what I did on this bag, which is just do diagonal lines down the center and on every edge of the hexagons. And so you basically just start at one end and line your foot up and sew straight down this kind of 60-degree angle. And so I don't really need to mark that because I basically have a guideline every couple of inches. So this will be super easy to get quilted. So yeah, let's take it over to the machine. Okay, so I'm just going to use a cream colored thread to quilt on top of my hexagons. And I am going to use the kind of straight edges and the angles of the hexagons to create my crosshatch pattern. So what I'm going to do is just start over here from one end, and I'm just lining up the center, like where my needle is, with that center seam. I'm kind of trying to stitch in the ditch between these two hexagons and then straight across the next, stitch in the ditch, straight across, etc. until I get all the way off the edge of the quilt top. And I am going to use a stitch length 2.6, just a little bit longer than normal. This is just quilting lines. This doesn't need to be a super tiny stitch for piecing. And I'm not going to back stitch at the start and stop because I'm going to trim this whole thing down in another step, and so I would just end up trimming all that off. So it doesn't matter. I'm just going to quilt my lines. As you can see, I'm just kind of eyeballing it as I go across an open hexie. If you prefer, you can definitely mark these lines out, but I'm just eyeballing it. And down here, I am actually going to sew just on top of the fabric just to tack this edge down. This is going to end up being cut off, but I want it tacked down for now. And so I'm just going to repeat my lines from top to bottom, this direction and then this direction, and that will give me the nice cross-hatched quilting look I'm going for. Okay, I'm just making sure every hexagon has an X through it. And yeah, I think we're all good. This is what the back looks like, just little diamonds. And yeah, so this will be the outside of our bag, and this will be on the lining side of our bag. I know they're not the same print, like the same fabric line, but I like to use a lighter background print on the inside. It makes it easier to see inside the bag. And this is just some leftover from a Christmas quilt I made last year, and I thought, why not use this as the lining, because it'll be pretty to look at when I look inside my bag. Okay, so now that we have our front panel quilted and made, I'm gonna trim this down into a shape that will fit in the project bag. So as you can see from the one I already did, I basically just square up the top and edges, leaving me the biggest rectangle possible, and then I add the rest of the fabric. So let me trim up this. Okay, it looks like I can get about a 7 1/4 tall panel. No, 7 3/4, sorry. 7 3/4 tall panel. And it's going to be about 12 3/4 inches wide. Okay, so from my little EPP panel, made a little quilt sandwich for the front of the bag. And if I haven't already talked about this at the beginning, so this bag goes together a lot like a quilt, where we're gonna build the layers and then bind the edges. And so you can see how this piece is gonna fit right here. We're gonna make a top piece, we're gonna make a backing, and then we're gonna bind all of the edges, you know, to get us to this point. So let's get everything else cut out and I'll show you how we put it together. Yeah, just double checking my fabric placement. Yep, this is still gonna be my accent fabric on the front. Okay, I'm just saving myself a piece of this green for the back of the bag. I had talked about using maybe some of those fat quarters, but I think I probably will just use the green on the back. So I'm just gonna set this piece aside. I know it's plenty big to go on the back of my bag. And then the rest of it, obviously I won't need the rest of it, but I can cut the 3 pieces. I need 2 pieces for here and 1 piece for here. So let's cut those out. Myself a nice straight edge. And then for the top of the zipper, I need 2 pieces that measure 2.5 inches wide. And for the length on these, I'll cut these down in a minute, but basically they need to be 2.5 inches wide by at least as long as your bag, which my panel measured 13 inches wide. So I just need these to be at least 13 inches wide. And yeah, they're about 16 inches wide, so that's fine. So here's my 2 pieces that are 2.5 inches. And then I need 1 piece that's 2 inches. And that will go on the bottom of the zipper. Okay, and I think that's all I need out of this green. Okay, and then I need a lining piece for the back side of the bag. So Let me just see, what will I use? Yeah, I'll just use this plaid on the inside of the back. So before I know how big to cut out my back pieces, the lining and the backing, I need to first assemble the front of my project bag. And then that will determine the exact size that I cut these two pieces down to. So to construct the front of our bag, you're going to need a zipper. I'm using this super fun red and white striped one that's from Studio Cat Designs. And I have found these at the Houston Quilt Show before, but I think they are available online. So actually, yeah, studiocatdesigns.com. I'll link them down below. Oh, but before we can assemble, I need to cut one more thing out, which is interfacing. So for the panel that goes on top of the zipper with these two pieces, I want to sandwich a piece of fusible interfacing or fusible fleece interfacing between these two to match like a similar thickness to the quilted piece on the bottom, because I want the whole bag to kind of have the same weight and feel. So first I'm going to cut out a strip of fusible fleece to go between these two pieces before I can assemble. Okay, since my strips are 2.5 inches wide, I am going to cut the fusible 2 inches wide. And this is going to give me a 1/4 inch margin on each side where there's not fusible fleece. And that's just going to allow for slightly less bulky seams. So I'm going to cut out a 2-inch strip, and the length is perfect. We'll trim this down later. Okay, so I'm going to take this to the ironing board and just fuse it right in the middle of one of these strips, and then we'll talk about assembling. Okay, so here is one of our 2.5 inch pieces that go above the zipper with the fusible fleece sewn down to it. And so to assemble the upper portion of the zipper, what we're going to want to do is I'm going to first scoot these zipper pulls all the way down. This zipper is much longer than what we actually need, obviously, because this strip is even longer than what we need. So I'm just going to place it in the middle, and I'm just pulling the zipper pull so they're out of the way. Actually, first we lay down the lining piece. And then we lay the zipper down on top of that. And then we lay our outside piece on top of that. And then I use some pins. Okay, so now I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine. So I'm using slightly less than a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm just sewing straight down the zipper, making sure everything's staying lined up. Just realized I never shortened my stitch length from previously, and actually I want to switch to my zipper foot. I'm going to resew. I'm not going to rip this out. I'm just going to resew slightly inside of this line with a tighter stitch length because I forgot to do that. I just reduced my stitch length to a 2.0, so it's a little bit more of a normal stitch length. So then these will get pressed up and become the top of the zipper band, and then we need to make the bottom one. Okay, so that's our top zipper band. And then with the 2-inch strip, we are going to make a double fold binding. And so to do that, first I'm going to press in half. And that's just to give us a center line for now. And so I'm going to fold the edges almost to the center. So not quite, but kind of almost to the center. I'll let that cool off before I burn my fingers. And then I am going to fold the entire thing in half. and then really give this a good press to complete the double fold binding. Okay, so now for this small piece, what we're going to do is I'm going to top stitch it on to the zipper first, and then we'll add our quilted panel into the fold. So, and remember, we haven't trimmed any of the width yet, so we have plenty of wiggle room to work with. This is all going to get trimmed down perfectly once we know the final size of our bag. Oops, okay, so it looks like for some reason right here my top stitching missed the edge. So I'm just gonna clean that up. And we'll see, most of this might end up getting trimmed off anyways when I'm finalizing the bag. But okay, so this is our zipper panel. And so now I need to slide our quilt panel inside here, and I am going to kind of cheat it to this side, so I ended up cutting off most of this area where I had to double stitch. I'm going to switch back to my just plain flat open toe, or not open toe, my plain clear foot for my machine. I don't think I need the zipper foot anymore. Okay, so all I'm going to do is slide the top of the quilted panel in here, not quite all the way, but almost all the way to the zipper. And I'm going to wrap this around, and I'm just going to make sure I'm staying, you know, kind of 1/8, 1/16 away from the edge of the panel. I'm making my stitches nice and even, and then I'll just pause every little bit to double check that I'm still on track. Okay, so there we have the front of our bag with our zipper panel added to it. And then this is what the lining side looks like with our lining piece from earlier. And then I just used the same fabric as the outside for the lining of this little top part. And then while I'm sitting here at the machine, I'm going to baste the top two pieces together just so they stay in place for future steps. And so I'm just going to baste 1/8 of an inch in from the edge with a 4.0 stitch length. Okay, let's take this back to the cutting mat and get the rest of the pieces cut to size. Okay, so I'm going to square up the front of this bag. And I'm just going to scoot these all the way over for a second. And so now that I have trimmed off the edge of the zipper, I have to be very careful to keep my zipper pulls inside inside the bag and not let them go off the edges and lose my zippers. Okay, so now the front of our bag is complete. Lining, exterior. So now we can cut our backing and back lining pieces to size, because now we know what the finished size of our bag is going to be. So let me just measure this and mark it down. So it is 10 3/4 by 13. So here is the outside of our bag on the back, and here will be the lining. And the same way we did the front, we're going to make a little quilt sandwich, except instead of batting, I'm just going to use fusible fleece on one of the pieces to give the back the same kind of thickness that the front has. So let me cut a piece of fusible fleece. I'm going to cut the fusible fleece the exact same size as the back and the lining because it will act as the batting between the layers, and so it can go edge to edge, similar to how a quilt is, and will bind the edges. Okay, so I'm going to take my two back pieces, the lining and the outside, and I am going to fuse my fusible fleece right down to this piece of fabric. Okay, so I've got my backing fabric with the fusible fleece, and I'm going to assemble the bag so we can get it ready for binding. So I'm going to lay the backing fabric pretty side down, and then the lining fabric pretty side up. And so this will be inside our bag. And then we'll take our front of our bag that we made earlier, lining side down. And then I'm just going to clip all around the edge so that we can baste all the layers together. Looks good. I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and do a little basting stitch. So I'm basting everything together about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge, and I'm using a 4.0 stitch length. Got everything basted together, so now we can work on binding the edges and finishing the bag. Okay, I am going to go with this red and white stripe for the binding, and I am going to cut it out on the bias. And so I'm just going to use the 45-degree line on my ruler. And I'm going to cut 2.5-inch wide binding strips. So I think I'm going to need 3 of these strips. Since I know on the third piece I don't need it to be quite as long, I'm going to cut it out of the scrap side. Got our 3 pieces of binding. Let's go over to the sewing machine and get the binding made and attached to our bag. Okay, so you can of course bind the bag with straight grain binding. I just really wanted a bias stripe, and since I only had a straight stripe, I had to cut my strips out on the bias. But definitely, you know, make this easier on yourself and just use straight of grain binding if you can, because you really don't need bias binding in this application. But that's what I'm using, so let me get mine put together. Just going to trim the seam allowance down to about 1/4 inch. Okay, so now I'm just going to take this to the ironing board, press my seams open, and then press the binding in half. Careful not to stretch it if you're using bias, but if you're using straight of grain, you're good to go. Okay, so for this binding, I am going to sew it onto the back first, and then fold it around to the top, or to the front to top stitch it. And so I'm going to start on the bottom of the bag, and I want to leave myself, you know, about a 4 to 6 inch tail. And I switched back to my 1/4 inch foot because I want to sew a 1/4 inch seam on the back, and that will give me about 3/8 of an inch on the front, so that when I top stitch on the front, it covers everything. So I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. But first, and I do just like binding a quilt, I come to the corner, I go off the corner, and then to turn a corner, I fold straight. Oh, well, I realized I didn't square up this corner very well, so. Okay, I'm just trimming a little bit of excess bulk out of this corner where everything didn't quite line up. Okay. So I'm going to fold up with a 45-degree angle right into that corner, and then fold the binding down so that then that top fold lines up with the top of the bag and the side comes down the side. And then I'm going to start right in the corner. So here is where our pieces of binding are going to meet. And all I'm going to do, well, first I'm going to trim this one down so I have less to work with. So you want to fold them into the center where they meet. And then I'm just going to give them a really good finger press to get a really good crease in the fabric right there, because that's going to be my marker for sewing them together in a second. Okay. And so now that I have them marked, of course you can join on the bias to end your pieces, but I find it so much easier and quicker to just end with a straight seam, and I think it's going to line up just fine. So what I do is I cut a 1/4 inch away from that fold I just made. Doesn't have to be a perfect 1/4 inch, just at least a 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to sew these together using that crease as my guide. And I don't want to be past it into the seam allowance because that will like have a loose binding. So if anything, I want to be a hair inside the line so it lays really tight and flat against the bag. So let me get this pinned and I'll show you. Okay, and so then I just finger press open the little seam I just made, fold it in half, and make sure it's going to lay nice and flat, which it does, yay. And then we just sew the rest of the binding down. Okay, so the binding is sewn to the back, and now we need to fold it around and sew it down to the front. Okay, so again, I'm going to switch out my foot. This time it's going to be for just my flat foot because I can't do a 1/4 inch seam on the front. I need to do a slightly wider seam to cover up all the raw edges. So for doing the top stitching and the binding, I like to have a stiletto tool handy and some Clover Wonder clips. So I'm trying to sew about 1/8 to a 1/16 inch away from the edge of my binding, and that way it will kind of rest right along the outside of the binding on the back. So this is how I bind quilts a lot too, but especially for bags I do it this way. Okay, and so when I get too close to the corner and I need to remove my clip, that's where I use my stiletto. So I kind of dig my stiletto into the layers right where the binding meets in the corner. And then once my tip of my needle has met this, this side fabric, I turn and I go down the 45 a couple of stitches. 1, 2, 3. And then I back it up and then I pivot and I start down the next side of my binding. So sometimes I don't even bother to clip, especially on the project bag when it's small, but definitely if it makes you more comfortable, you know, pin and clip, however you like. Actually, I'm going to clip right here, and then I'll get my stiletto in that point. Okay, and so just like that, we have our bag all bound and ready to use. And you can see what it looks like on the back. And then open it up, see the nice lining we put in it. So yeah, super fun and not too time consuming to make. It just took me about an hour and a half or two to put this together. Okay, so you made a bag and it's so cute. Here is the binding all fully attached and on. You can kind of see what the back looks like. I think I might next time do a 2¼ inch binding rather than 2½ inch because I actually had a lot of room when I was folding this over. I use 2½ inch binding on my quilts, so that's what I use on my bags, but now having done it a few times, I think I might switch next time to using 2¼ inch binding. So just something to think about as you're making the bag yourself. But I think it turned out so super cute. We have our little center zip and it's fully lined, no raw edges anywhere. I just really love this style of bag. And of course, you know, you could do anything for this front center panel. It doesn't have to be EPP. It could be different shapes of EPP. It could be a kind of specialty panel or a block that you've made. But yeah. I just love these little EPP hexies, and I'm so glad I found a way to put some to use. So that is our project bag. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.